이번 사명은 전쟁을 억제함에 있지만 이 땅에서 우리가 결코 바라지 않는 상황이 조성되는 경우에까지 우리의 핵이 전쟁 방지라는 하나의 사명에만 속박되어 있을 수는 없습니다. 특히 우리 국가가 보유한 핵무력을 최대의 급속한 속도로 더욱 강화 발전시키기 위한 조치들을 계속 취해 나갈 것입니다.
О возможности и допустимости применения против России оружия массового поражения, ядерного оружия, тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России. Хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф.
Chinese military jets flying near Taiwan this morning, about 60 of them practicing precision strikes on key targets in and around this island. It's part of an exercise that Beijing is calling Joint Sword, which also includes at least 9 Chinese warships that are encircling the island, simulating a naval blockade.
Good morning. We are coming on the air with breaking news. Israel has declared it is at war after a sudden, unprecedented and deadly surprise attack by Hamas this morning. The Palestinian militant group essentially invaded parts of Israel today, infiltrating by land, sea, even air, sending paragliders in. Hamas also launching thousands of rocket attacks, overwhelming Israel's robust defenses, and then sending armed militants into the streets of Israel, some of whom were seen cutting fences at Israel's border with Gaza City to get into the country.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה. לא במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה.
Iran's foreign minister's comments from only a few hours ago. He basically, I just want to reiterate for people who might just be joining us, he basically said that his country will not remain an observer in the ongoing conflict, that if the scope of this conflict widens, heavy losses will be inflicted on the United States.
To the north of where I am now is on high alert as well. Shelling has been ongoing along the border with Israel. It's resulted in the deaths of a Reuters journalist on Friday and an Israeli civilian just today. And as the world waits to see if Hezbollah will join this war.
The Pentagon announcing the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group is heading to the Eastern Mediterranean. Now that includes the Navy's newest aircraft carrier, the Ford, and cruisers and 4 guided missile destroyers.
Hey folks, and welcome to Financial Fitness with Patrick. As always, your host Patrick, and presented by Soaring Prophets. We love those guys, handsome fellas, let me tell you, for those of you out there that are listening. What a week. You know, you hear our little blurb this morning when we first jumped on there, and you see the pressures that are going on in the world. And in Financial Fitness, what we're focusing on is the geopolitical, the markets, but also kind of the humanitarian, what's going on as well. And we've had the opportunity to really watch panic in the worldwide markets, but also the stability that comes from little minor tweaks and changes. So we look at last Friday in the market where we had people rushing to safety. This was a big flush down in the NASDAQ and the S&P 500. And the reason is that people were not willing to hold risk assets for the duration of the weekend. And why would you? We didn't know if we were going to end up in an armed hand-to-hand conflict in the Middle East where the Israelis move into Gaza, start cleaning out this area. This could have really popped off in a big way. You've got organizations within Hamas, Iranian-backed Hezbollah. This was going to be a potential nightmare. So what did the market do, and why did it do it? So Friday, we see the market flush down in a big way, pulling out of the high-risk assets, pulling out of the NASDAQ, pulling your ETFs like your QQQ, your triple Q, your S triple Qs, those pull back. And why? Is that we don't know what's going to come next, okay? We have the flush down. we have the entire weekend. And what happens? The Biden administration sends Blinken over, the Secretary of Defense of the United States. He starts doing the rounds in the Middle East, calming nerves, meeting with Netanyahu of Israel and saying, hey, if you want to go in here, you have to have an exit strategy. We cannot be put in a situation where once again, we are bogged down in a conflict for years and years and years. Where this Gaza one, is this going to be a conflict like we've had for millennia, or is this going to be new sparking conflict? And that's where the market was trying to read. So we see Monday, people's fears are a little bit calmed about the immediacy that the Israelis were going to have in regards to this. And the market kind of rallies. People are willing to take a little bit more risk. So as we see the risk start to come back up, we see the NASDAQ rally. We see the T-tip triple Q, which is the triple leveraged index, rally. And people were taking more risk. What did we see? We saw Bitcoin. That's an ironic kind of a weird pitch off of that. But Bitcoin is now kind of proving that it might be a store of value in the essence of instability, right? You've got a potential war, you got a potential conflict. We saw this with the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Now we're seeing it here. Bitcoin tends to rally off these things. But the big things, the things that move markets, was our ability to watch gold, oil, and bonds. Okay, so let's talk about gold initially. Gold, as its name implies, it is the old man in the room. It has been around for forever, and it is such a store of value. In unstable, inconsistent markets, gold is going to be your go-to, as per usual. And we see gold really pop. Okay, the next is oil. Well, why would oil be, a real concern right now? We're in the Middle East, folks. All of these nations are massive oil-producing countries. So, Israel itself is not, right? But its neighbors sure are. You have Iran with Hezbollah. You have Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not going to side with Israel on any of this. They were very close to brokering a deal with Israel, with the Americans' help, in making it, and it would have been a great deal for Biden administration as well, but turning on the taps, getting back to normal relations in the Middle East. That does not appear to be what will actually happen. And that's going to be inflationary. That's going to be inflationary for the Biden camp, right? President Biden cannot buy an opportunity now to get the support that he needs to get this going. So the last thing that we turn to here is the bond market. And this kind of goes into our guest this afternoon. But the bond market is the debt market. We've talked great deals about this. The bond market is debt. The debt of a nation, the debt of a business, the debt of yourselves. You create a bond, you pay that back. And what we saw on Friday is that we saw the bond yields lower. So the interest rates that people were willing to give lower. And the reason is it's inverse in regards to a stock. Let's take Tesla, for instance, one of our popular ones. But Tesla, the more people that buy Tesla, the more demand on the fixed supply, and Tesla prices go up. Bonds are the complete opposite. The more people want them, the lower they're willing to give you on a rate of return for your bond. So when bond yields drop, that means that people want them. And why wouldn't you? You can go buy a bond right now in the market where you can get a one-year bond for almost 5%. Well, if I was to say to you in the last 15 years that you give me your money and I'm going to index it to a fund, you're going to be between 5 and 7% on a return, with lots of risk, with lots of volatility. Our bond markets now are guaranteed. They're going to be paid. They're backed by the red, white, and blue, the American flag, Uncle Tom, and the military that backs it. They're as good as gold. The problem that we have now is that we have volatility in this bond market. Well, our bonds are what we base our mortgage rates off, our loans off, our lines of credit, our auto loans. Everything is based off these products. So Friday, we see this dip. We see the market rallying, though, or the market falling, though. It should be the opposite. As the dollar gets stronger and the yields get higher, we should see equities pull back. Equities are stocks, right? What we're seeing right now, though, is the inverse. Something's out of whack, and it's the conflict. So we look at debt, and we look at nations like Japan and the Bank of Japan that have been doing yield curve controls for years now. fighting to create inflation and stimulate their market. And where we are right now in the world with this massive inflationary process that we're going to have in the Middle East, and whatever that comes with, everyone's going to have their own opinion about whether this is going to be an event that is going to pop off and cause global instability. But the market right now doesn't seem to be thinking that it's all that serious yet. Now we're going to have... Well, folks, speaking of sovereign debt, I have a special guest tonight, Mark Reid, host of the Zen Sandwich podcast all the way from Japan, and one of the top online public speaking figures on LinkedIn, award-winning as well. Not only just that, he is also the top online content creation voices on LinkedIn as well. Joining us all the way from Japan, Mr. Mark Reid. How are you doing tonight, Mark?
I'm great. I like how you introduced me with speaking of sovereign debt. Here's Mark Reid. I don't know if the sovereign part applies or all my debt applies, but anyway, here we go. I'm happy to be here.
I love it. I love it, pal. Well, we are thrilled to have you. So, Mark, you and I, we've kind of gotten to know each other over the last little while through the LinkedIn community, the Hounds of Business. And when we started doing financial fitness, the last little chat that we had here, I talked about where the world is in regards to inflation, interest rates, the bond market, and Japan just jumps into my lap. And you're my Japanese connection today. So tell me a little bit about yourself. You are an Alabama boy, born and raised, off to Syracuse for education. How do you find yourself in Japan?
Well, the long story short is a woman.
Ah,
of course, but there's a lot more to it than that. The medium short version is I had always had an interest in Japanese culture when I was younger. Like a lot of boys, a lot of kids, I was interested in martial arts, and so I studied judo and aikido. That was what was available to me, and for whatever reason, in the class when we're doing reps, we're counting in Japanese. Everything else is in English, but we're just like ichi ni sanchi when we're counting reps. Fast forward to me going to college, and I'm like, oh, I went to a big university, went to University of Alabama, and so you can minor in Swahili if you want there. But I'm like, oh, they teach Japanese. I can count to 10, which is a totally dumb reason to minor in a foreign language because that's all I could do. But anyway, that led to the interest in Japan, and it was my first job out of college teaching English here. And I came and went several times. I taught at a couple of universities here. I taught at Kanagawa University and Tokyo University of Science. And I don't know, over the years, the interest grew. I did meet and fall in love with my wife. We didn't get married until 2019, but I met her back in 2004. So put all that together, that's how I'm here now.
Well, I think it's fantastic. And one of the things that you brought up there was about the Japanese culture in and of itself. So you manufacture washi in your business. Tell the folks what that is, and tell me what that is.
Well, washi is traditional handmade Japanese paper, and so even to say that we manufacture it is a big word for what we do, because this is very old school. We grow the trees, we harvest them, we steam them, we make paper. And the kind of paper, it's very durable, much more durable than so it's a lot more expensive too, than what you would get at Office Max or whatever. This is not like copy paper. This is paper that goes in like paper screen doors, or that you would write calligraphy or even, do a painting on. There's a lot of uses for it, actually. But the Japanese government, because they want to preserve a lot of the traditional arts, there is a lot of funding. So my wife, several years ago, she because we both are corporate people. I mean, we're both urban people, and so this is a change of pace, a change of lifestyle for us to live in the countryside and make paper. But she wanted a pivot, and she did an apprenticeship program. She was an apprentice under a master washi maker. Now she makes it herself, and I make it. I'm her apprentice. So we make paper.
Well, at least you know the organizational chart and how it flows downhill from there. I think that's good.
I'm at the bottom. Let's put it
that's it.
way.
Yeah. Well, for those of you, the profiteers out there, and those of you that are following with financial fitness, is that you're probably maybe scratching your head at this point, wondering how does this have anything to do with the financial markets? But Japan is a nation that we look at, from a debt to GDP ratio And as well as, we're talking with Mark today about the cultural aspect. And Japan has a demographic problem that is relating directly to their sovereign debt issue. And if you look at where we are in the trajectory of the stock market, in the markets on a whole, is that we have rising interest rates that are going to end up costing nations billions, trillions. You can take it from there. Our debt is going to become a problem. And for a nation like Japan that through the 90s into the early 2000s had massive deflation. And Mark, maybe you can talk a little bit about the deflationary aspects about like real estate, property value, even just the yen itself for a long period of time since you have been there. And now the counteracting that we're seeing in the inflationary rise in Japan.
Yeah, well, let's state up front, I'm not an economist. I can tell you what it's like here on the ground. And as for the real estate market, we've talked some off camera about like my situation, and it relates to the demographic, the changing and evolving demographic here in Japan. It's an aging population. The population is actually declining. They're not reproducing as much as there are. Old people are living longer and they're not having babies. So what that means is that I saw a stat the other day, like I forgot the percentage, but it might be the highest percentage in the world of like people alive over 70 or over 80 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so back to real estate, and what that means is that young people, they don't want to live out in the countryside where I am. They all move to Tokyo and Osaka, or Kyoto or Nagoya, Fukuoka, the big major cities. So, and because they're not having children, and it's just old people around me basically, right. And they do eventually die. And so what that means is that there are a lot of empty houses. Real estate in the countryside is actually not a great investment in Japan, right. Even though I did it, but I did it because it was cheap. I mean, this right. house, I won't go into numbers of how much it cost me, but basically this size, the square footage and the amount of land that came with it, it would probably be 10 times what I paid for it in the United States, depending on what city. But this was probably was 10% of what it would have cost me in America.
Right. So Mark, when you're talking about the demographic situation there, this is something that I've spoken very briefly about in our show before, but demographics are kind of an inverted, like a triangle is what they should be. You should have lots of babies. You should have a few less teens into your 20s. It should look like a pyramid into old right. age. Well, so many right. after the baby boom processes, so many nations around the world, here in Canada as well, but very dangerously and most importantly, China we're looking at with these inverted demographics where you have fewer and fewer and fewer children. The problem with that, the scary thing about that is that when you don't have upcoming consumers to purchase products, to purchase real estate, to purchase right. investments, what you have is you have a downward pressure on a sales market demand. So the influx of supply versus demand comes out of whack. So in a nation like Japan, when we see that inverted demographic, we see right. higher debt to facilitate the social programs that are put into place. So Japan has one of the, if not probably within this week, probably has the highest debt to GDP, gross domestic product ratio of all of the developed world. And when you have that, you have to take into account how that's going to be passed on to a next generation. Well, we just talked about there's no next generation. Who's going to foot that bill? So when we see programs like that, it sounds like the traditional culture is super important in Japan. Are you seeing immigration being checked? Are they bringing people in? How is Japan dealing with that?
Well, that is the question to ask. That is a terrific question because, I mean, while the government has put in place some incentives for young couples to have more children, they do get some tax breaks. They do get, they might even get a check for doing it. The government Japan is not very immigration friendly. It's even hard for, I'm an American, which America and Japan have a great relationship. and it's still even difficult. You know, it's not for me now. I'm here, I'm married, and I'm a resident, but to get in is hard. But they're having to loosen up those rules because their concern is actually in healthcare, because you've got an aging population, and there's not enough healthcare workers to take care of them. And so they're really opening the door to people in Southeast Asia that are qualified to be healthcare professionals, nurses, and what have you. So that door is opening up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm shouting out like nations in regards to like Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, those people there coming in as trained. The social programs for them to come in, are they able to educate themselves in their country and then come into Japan, or are you seeing where we'll educate you here?
From my understanding, I'm not an expert in that, but from my understanding, they can receive their, if they go to a what's the word I'm looking for? Certified university, a qualified. There's a word that's escaping my mind now, but anyway, if it's a reputable university in Laos or Thailand or whatever, and they receive their degree there, then they can enter the country. But there is a language sort of requirement. I mean, they do have to speak a certain level of Japanese to be able to do those jobs.
Well, so I think
it's tough. It's a tough situation. I mean, this is, America, they're debating guns and abortion. The big debate here is immigration. And, it's interesting when you live in a different country, you see that the hotbed political topics in your home country don't even exist in this country.
Right.
The ones that exist here aren't even talked about in my home country. So, but the ones that make the news here, it's the aging population, and how much should we allow immigration? Because they want to preserve the Japanese way of life. It's not like a melting pot like America or Canada. We're like, hey, let everybody in. We love the more the merrier. The Japanese want to preserve the Japanese way of life.
Well, and I think when you have, the Sea of Japan between you and mainland immigration processes, you get to be a little bit more specific in who and what your process is going to look like. And another aspect around that is, again, something that I'm very passionate about in learning and educating myself. And it's such a fluid situation right now, is China, right? Mm-hmm. So when you in Japan and you're listening to media and reports, what is the relationship with China and Japan right now? Again, like you said earlier, is Japan is so closely tied to the Americans. We have military bases. We are very much power hungry with Japan. We are the stability for Japan in this area. What are you hearing in regards to China with potentially invasion of Taiwan, as well as just kind of the media in general portraying the Chinese in this kind of hostile time we're seeing around the world?
Well, a personal opinion that's, I'm not a political pundit. I'm not qualified to give it, but I'm just going to give it to you anyway. I don't think that China will invade Taiwan. It almost serves them better to keep the propaganda, the rhetoric heated up, to keep the pressure on everybody and to make deals, but as a leveraging point. But I don't see it actually ever happening. Yeah. And as far as what, the perceptions that I have that are what's being portrayed in the Japanese media about, let's say, economic policy with China, you might as well just consider Japan the East Asian extension of the United States. Whatever the United States does in relation with China or South Korea, Japan does the same.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. I think that the war, the drum beating that we hear in the United States in regards to Southeast Asia and the Taiwan, I'm going to call it the Taiwan conflict, because they're doing the flybys, they're doing this sort of thing, but it does feel a lot more like saber rattling, chest beating than anything. And one of the things that we're seeing right now, especially with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're seeing the scarcity of resources for China. China, if they end up in a situation where they're out over their skis, looking at the potential invasion of what the rest of the world views as a sovereign nation, China is not energy independent, right? That kind of goes back to an issue in Japan as well. After Fukushima, energy independence is understood to be super important. And China They do not have the capacity to produce the oil refineries, to do the oil reserves that they need to keep their country running. They are super dependent on the Middle East. And
Yeah.
if China gets out over their skis and they invade a Taiwan, it feels very much like the United States can put a destroyer or two in the Middle East, shut down that avenue, and China would slowly bleed to death and suffocate. What's your viewpoint? Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Well, I said that won't happen either. I mean, they'll float that again. I'm speculating, and there are plenty of people who can listen to this and criticize my point of view. But I've been around long enough now. It just all seems like, to use your term, saber rattling. It all seems like a show. I lived in South Korea. in 2003 when Papa Kim Jong was in control, and it's in the news every day. But this is so different than the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Those people, I mean, it's religion, it's blood, that's going on for thousands of years.
Yeah.
The Koreas and China and Japan, there's some bad history for sure, but it is not the same thing. And the rhetoric has been going on all my life, but
Right.
I don't see tanks rolling over the border. It's just it scares people. It gets people. So the United States will float a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, but or wherever. But I don't see an actual physical conflict between the United States and China. They need each other too much.
Right.
They need
Oh,
each
absolutely.
other too much.
They are so in bed, and that's one of the issues. That I'm going to use Apple as a for instance in this situation, is that they're looking to pivot some of their manufacturing with Foxconn, one of the biggest manufacturers of their iPhone and tablet products that we had. Well, I shouldn't call it a tablet, iPad products, and probably get canceled for misnaming it. But these are now pivoting into, again, developing nations like India. India is on this unique rise, and India is getting cheap commodities out of Russia, out of Iran. Like, they don't care. They are dealing with BRICS now. That is an interesting kind of dynamic that everyone thinks is brand new. BRICS has been floating around here since like 2002, 2001. This is nothing new. It's just making the media now because we're having these little saber-rattling tensions, like you say. But
Yeah.
when you look around the world and you see the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, do you think that is going to boil over, or do you think that that's going to be an isolated thing that has been for millennia?
Boil over in what regard? Like, I mean,
So I look at it right now,
like
and I would say
World War III, like everybody starts jumping in on this.
Well,
I don't see that happening.
My only issue is Iran. Like, I look at Iran tied to Russia, then tied back to China. That becomes like your triple détente, your triple entente. What was it in World War I? There's some weird things that are starting to manifest there. I don't think we're there. I don't know if Joe Biden maybe is the guy to go and negotiate that truce, or what that's going to quite look like. But what is your feel as, an educated guy that's kind of got a finger on the pulse of the world? What do you think's happening in the Middle East right now?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, and I might be an educated guy, but what I've found is that the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. Like, so I'm reluctant to prognosticate what's going to happen. Who knows, right? But especially when you're dealing with religion and jihad and things like that, you can't predict that stuff. But in terms of like how countries are going to act and interact as a result of what happens in Gaza, I think China is going to play, again, I'm lacking a word here, but like they're gonna play Russia with one hand, and they're gonna play, their dependency on oil from the Middle East maybe on the other, and the United States with, they're gonna stay neutral, but not like Switzerland. They're gonna take sides in one respect. They're gonna have their meetings with Putin, but and they'll leverage things financially, economically, but I don't think they're ready for blood to be shed.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen. I know that's sort of a vague answer, as sort of a cryptic response to your question,
No.
but it's just like I think it's just all politics. and people are going to make money off of it somehow. There's going to be, war profiteers that'll make money off of it somehow. That, like, the United States will want to beef up their defense budget in case China invades Taiwan, which they won't, but it'll be $1 billion contract to Boeing or, like, I don't know, General Dynamics or some contract.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly, what we talked about in the earlier segment here, is that talking about these defense contractors that are doing well in this time of instability. But one of the ones, and you kind of said it, Mark, is that you can look to the stock market for certain tells. And one of the ones is that oil. We had a big pop in oil prices over the weekend, right, in the futures contracts, and then they've subsided, right? So that's telling me that there's not a fear of a long-lasting future confrontation here. So, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on here today. It's been a pleasure. You are one of the hounds that I always love having a chat with. You're a gentleman, you're a scholar, and you have your opinions, but you're also, again, taking that, I don't want to prognosticate, using your term. You are a great guy. I thank you so much for joining us all the way from Japan. And if you were sending the people off with a little tidbit of knowledge, what would you be telling them?
Well, my thing is Zen. It's not economics. So I don't have any economic wisdom for you. Other than this, don't spend your whole life chasing the dollar. Spend some time enjoying the dollars that you have. I don't know. Just happiness is within. It's not in the toys that you buy. Sure, it's nice to go buy toys. It's nice to save up money. It's nice to invest in things that bring you a profit. But don't spend your whole life doing all that. Have a cigar, go sit outside and enjoy the weather.
Did Sia send you hers yet? They'll just leave it.
No. Yeah.
Folks, as always, we appreciate you. The profiteers out there. Let's make some money together from a real samurai.